As the U.S. prepares to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, how will the region be affected long term? And will Iran continue to pursue nuclear weapons should President Biden renew the so-called nuclear deal? Middle East and foreign policy expert WALID PHARES is here with analysis. And a pastor in Canada continues to be visited by police for what they say are violations of COVID safety protocols. Pastor ARTUR PAWLOWSKI is here to share his story. What would it have been like to be present at Jesus' Last Supper with his apostles? An award-winning filmmaker has created a visceral depiction of those pivotal moments in Christ's life. Armando Acosta is here with a preview of his new film, The Last Supper, The Living Tableau. Finally, William Shakespeare was born 457 years ago this week. Did the bard use his art to comment on religious and political strife at the time? Author and scholar Claire Asquith explores that possibility in her new book, The World Over. Begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. WALID PHARES, Pastor ARTUR PAWLOWSKI, and Claire Asquith are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. First, a little news. On Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters that President Biden respectfully disagrees with the U.S. bishop's statement objecting to federally funded research using fetal tissue derived from abortions. EWTN News Nightly reporter Owen Jensen asked Psaki about the decision to lift the ban on taxpayer dollars going to fund research on aborted fetal tissue. Despite the bishop's statement that such a decision was deeply offensive, Psaki said this.
We believe that it's important to invest in science and look for opportunities to cure diseases, and I think that's what this is hopeful to do.
Countries are currently meeting in Vienna to try to bring the United States back into the Iran nuclear deal. The Biden administration has said it will withdraw U.S. troops from Afghanistan. But what will that mean to the region? To bring us up to speed on this and much more, we're joined by foreign policy expert WALID PHARES. WALID, thanks for being with us. WALID, before we get to the situation in the Middle East, Vice President Kamala Harris announced this week that the U.S. will send an additional $310 million in aid to the Northern Triangle countries in Central America. In addition, 16 Department of Homeland Security employees will be sent to Guatemala to train members of the Guatemalan task force in an effort to upend the migrant crisis overwhelming authorities at the border. Your thought on how effective this is and what this really means?
Well, my friend, this is what the Trump administration tried to do, advocated, which is to engage these countries in Central America so that there are no refugees crossing their borders and addressing these matters. Unfortunately, it took so long for this administration to realize that the policy they have criticized is the policy that now they're coming back to in a way or another way.
Yeah, no, they did away with all the Trump agreements with Guatemala and Mexico, threw them out by executive order the moment they came into office. Now they're trying to rebuild the bridges, and the border is being stormed. So it's a humanitarian nightmare. Let's hope they can do something to stem the tide of people coming. On Tuesday, several countries resumed talks in Vienna, focused on bringing the U.S. back into the nuclear deal with Iran. Now, during a press conference this week, State Department spokesman Ned Price talked about the U.S. approach to Iran this way.
What we are focused on is one thing and one thing only, and that is achieving and securing an agreement that verifiably and permanently prevents Iran from ever obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Does re-entry into the Iran nuke deal keep Iran from developing a nuclear program, WALID?
No. It all is about the intention, strategic intention of the Iranian regime, We've argued that before the Obama administration, during those 8 years, and during the 4 years of the Trump administration, the problem is not the actual deal. The problem is the Iran regime. It could manipulate any deal. And then look what happened when the first deal was signed in 2015. The Iranian regime used the deal to get the money, buy the weapon, pay their militias, control 4 countries in the Middle East: Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen. And now the spokesperson of the State Department, if we paid attention to what he said, we want to reach a deal. So that even themselves, they don't believe that this deal is going to be the legitimate one. And good luck to negotiate with the Iranian regime without pressures. So that combination that the Trump administration brought, pressures and a new deal, now they're going back to it in a way or another.
Iran is demanding the lifting of sanctions by the U.S. Will that make a difference? Do you think the U.S. will lift those sanctions to get the deal you just talked about?
First of all, it's a mistake. The only leverage we have as Americans are these sanctions. We lift those sanctions if the Iranians will say, okay, we're going to disband the militias. We're going to stop purchasing and developing ballistic missiles. We are actually going to stop producing a nuclear, weapon. If the Iranians at least make the statement, we're not even asking them to do it immediately. If they make that statement, we may consider the engagement and discussions about the sanctions. But the ambiance in Tehran is now we are winning, we are controlling, the Americans are afraid. They are now releasing some secrets about their negotiations with the previous administration. It's just a chaos in Tehran.
Now, these talks are happening just days after a leaked audio emerged of Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif. He claims that Secretary of State John Kerry in 2015 told him about Israel launching more than 200 attacks on Iranian forces in Syria. Now, Kerry now claims he pointed to reports long in the public domain about Israeli strikes on Syrian assets, or Iranian assets, rather. Does that wash with you, Walid?
No, that's the most serious news of the day, of the week, I would say. For a member of the Obama administration to share with the Iranian regime, which is on our terror list, I mean, imagine that, information that he cannot get except from our intelligence community about a strategic ally. Now, my big question is, did he do it on his own, in his own name? He has some deal with the Iranians? Or did he do it as a result of a policy decided by President Obama? Either way, we have a problem, and either way, Congress and the media should investigate the matter.
Well, there are calls for John Kerry to step down. I mean, he is a cabinet official. He's now Joe Biden's climate czar. Should he step down?
I think they should call on him to come to Congress, and if the answers are not legitimate, he should resign, in my view.
On Saturday, the United States Navy reported that a group of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps speedboats and a larger support vessel swarmed 2 U.S. Coast Guard vessels on April 2nd. These vessels were maneuvering within 70 yards of the U.S. vessels. The incident came on the same day the Biden administration announced it would begin indirect talks with Iran regarding returning to that 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Why would the Iranians do this?
Well, that's exactly the equation we are concerned about. The Iranian regime, especially the Revolutionary Guard, they want to message their own population, especially their opposition, that look, the Americans are coming to negotiate with us. They are on their knees. We're going to impose what we want. That's very important. Why, Raymond? Because 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, actually, there was a revolution in Iran. All these demonstrations in Iran, in Iraq, in Lebanon. And therefore, I think they are trying to do it to make sure that the message also comes here that the Iranians have the upper hand in the negotiations. Do not put pressure on them.
Under the Biden administration, Walid, the U.S. military has begun a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan, and they'll be transitioning bases and equipment to Afghan security forces. Now, the Afghan security forces have endured a particularly difficult winter. Taliban offenses in the south and repeated attacks in the north have meant mounting casualties. Is this the right time to leave? Is there a right time to leave?
I think this is not the right way to leave. There's always a time to leave. I mean, if it was in 2012 or 14, we could have withdrawn then under the Obama administration, but that administration then refused to actually equip the Afghan army with what they needed on the one hand, refused to actually work with civil society, women, minorities, seculars, against the Islamists of the Taliban movement. So we are in Afghanistan conducting these military operations, and there is no solution in sight. So now the Biden administration wants to withdraw just because the Trump administration said May 1st. So they are doubling down and saying, oh, we are leaving on September the 11th, which is also another PR disaster. We cannot leave Afghanistan without leaving behind us a government, a society, and forces that are able to stop the Taliban, the jihadists. Look, yesterday they were still going back, the Taliban were going back to persecuting women. What's going to happen if we withdraw without these conditions met on the ground is another disaster and maybe another 9/11.
Wow. I want to move on to Lebanon. Undersecretary of State David Hale recently visited the country to encourage their leaders to quit their sectarian and self-serving bickering. Joblessness, lack of basic health care, food shortages are factors that continue to be a huge problem for the Lebanese. And Hezbollah is a force in Lebanon with close ties to Iran. How should the U.S. be dealing with Lebanon right now?
Raymond, in Lebanon, there is one top, very high priority. Everything else could be fixed by the Lebanese themselves. So when U.S. officials talk about Lebanon or visit Lebanon, what they need to do is to tell the world and tell the Lebanese that, first of all, we need to disarm Hezbollah. I mean, what kind of reform are you going to do if Hezbollah is in control of everything? What kind of foreign aid are you going to send if Hezbollah is going to receive it at the end of the day? We should be very clever dealing in Lebanon with civil society that showed that they are rising against Hezbollah. Lebanese army, we should support them and make sure that they direct their efforts to disarm Hezbollah. And we have all the legal tools, including an important UN resolution. I worked on it some 15 years ago, 1559, that actually calls on Hezbollah to disarm. That's what we should be doing.
In Egypt, we also are seeing problems emerge. A group with ties to the Islamic State executed one Coptic Christian and two tribesmen. The 13-minute video released late Saturday showed a 62-year-old Christian man being shot in the back of the head with an AK-47 in the middle of what appeared to be the Egyptian desert. What do you make of this incident? I thought ISIS was defeated.
It's a very sad video. I saw it, and many people in Washington did see what happened. And this is not the only incident. Many Copts, if you remember, were killed, maimed, massacred by ISIS, mostly in the northern part of the Sinai. So the U.S. policy should be very clear that we are standing with our allies, in this case, the Egyptian army, the Israeli army, the Arab coalition army, to defeat in a very strong way, not just ISIS, but what we have not done really is to defeat the ideology of ISIS. And unfortunately, this administration, like the Obama administration, is going and saying, well, the root causes are not the jihadi ideology. They are everything except the jihadi ideology. So we need to do a change of how to address that matter, not just on the battlefield, but in the war of ideas as well.
During a virtual panel discussion this past week, Iraqi Cardinal Louis Raphael Sacco reiterated his call for the creation of non-confessional states in the Middle East. He said, I think the only future for countries in the Middle East is to set up a secular regime and to respect religion. What we need is to end this mentality that Christians are infidels, this mentality of sectarianism. If I have some particularism, that doesn't mean I am not Iraqi or that I am someone outside, end quote. Can a secular regime exist in Iraq or other countries in the Middle East, Walid?
Look, Raymond, after World War I and the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the last caliphate, what did those middle-class elites in the cities do? Exactly what the patriarch was calling for. That's last century, 1920s. And why this did not happen? Because precisely of the ideologies of jihadism, Salafism, Khomeinism that came out of the region. And the problem has been here in America and in the West, not recognizing that the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, which has been the most dangerous because it creates those waves, is the one that we need to push against. And fortunately, the Brotherhood, as you know, we discussed it many times, had great influence during 8 years of the Obama administration, which delayed the fight in Afghanistan, which delayed the fight in rising those secular societies in the Middle East. So again, I go back to my important motto, you need to win the war of ideas. And then I agree with the patriarch. Then by itself, pluralism and secular ideas will prevail.
But right now, you don't have the population anymore. They've killed off or scattered the what you call civil society. Those Christian voices, those moderate Muslim voices, they're gone. I mean, that's the biggest challenge, it seems to me, in the region.
I agree, and remember what happened. We had always opportunities in the Middle East, and those opportunities were not seized enough. For example, the last one, 2019, during the fall of 2019. I mean, imagine a whole society, mostly young people, boys and girls, rise in Iraq against the sectarian militias, the Shia sectarian militias, and also against the Daesh. Same thing happened in Lebanon. Millions of people were rising against Hezbollah. Same happened in many places. I mean, look, in Egypt, we discussed it so many times years ago, how the Egyptian people rose against the Brotherhood and then got rid of them. And now Egypt is in a much better position. Imagine if Morsi stayed in power for all these years. So yes, we need to support these civil societies. And unfortunately, the minorities among them, Christians, Yazidis, and others, are shrinking. It's a question of demography now.
Cardinal Sacco said the Pope's recent visit to Iraq has increased respect for non-Muslims, especially Christians. Will that last?
First of all, let's be a little bit specific and add to what the Patriarch has said. This visit impacted and got the admiration and respect of the people who already like the Pope, who already like this multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, meaning those people who want to get rid of the extremists. It did not alter the view of the extremists, but it isolated them further. So the Pope can do as much as he can. He can visit, he can support, he can deliver speeches. The rest of the work is on the shoulders of countries like the US, France, NATO, Arab coalition, Israel, to come together and help those who are in need to fight and resist the jihadists of all kinds.
This month, President Biden formally recognized the killings of more than 1 million Armenians by the Ottoman Empire at the very start of the 20th century. He called it a genocide. Beginning on April 24th, 1915, with the arrest of Armenian intellectuals and community leaders in Constantinople by Ottoman authorities, 1.5 million Armenians were deported, massacred, or marched to their deaths in a campaign of extermination. The American people honor all those Armenians who perished in the genocide that began 106 years ago today. What do you make of the administration's announcement? Why do you think they decided to do it now, 106 years after the genocide?
You know, from an American perspective, it's overdue. Should it be the Biden administration or the previous administration, this should have been done. It's been done now. It's important that this message will go around the world that we don't accept genocide, from the Holocaust to any genocide regarding any religion around the world. We stood with the people in the Balkans when this happened to them. We stood with the people of Darfur and Sudan when this happened to them, from all religions. The problem is what we're going to do about it. Meaning, yes, declaration of genocide is important, but practically on the ground, we go back to your previous question. We need to protect these minorities. Those who are shrinking in numbers won't have the luxury, to just believe in declarations. We need to have a policy. And a policy in Turkey would be, number one, to pressure this government, which basically is taking, the Islamist ideology to levels never seen before in Turkey, because Turkey had a tradition of being secular, and then make sure that all minorities are represented, are accepted, and that most importantly, the educational system in the Middle East is reformed.
Yeah, well, Walid, this speaks to your working theory, and I think it's more than that, a practical approach to peace in the Middle East, which is you have to encourage and nurture civil society. Turkey's a perfect example with Ataturk of a secular society that everyone thought, oh, here's enshrined in the middle of this region, here's a secular society forever and ever. And now we're seeing it totally dismantled and Islamicized.
You know, civil society and democracy and all these values are a work in progress. You cannot just have one government, like in this case, Ataturk, and he used some sort of pressure as well. And then when the AKP, the Islamist party of Mr. Erdogan came to power in 2002, we let it do whatever they want in the region, to such a point that even inside Turkey, the secular element was suppressed by this government. And now we see that they are oppressing their own Turkish and Kurdish opposition. So we have to be more forceful in making sure that these values are protected, are defended in the region.
There was a new Morning Consult poll this week, and it found that the U.S. global standing has noticeably improved since Biden took office. U.S. favorability is up 47 points with Germany. It's up 37 points with France. But China and South Korea have a negative view of Biden. A 2-point drop in South Korea, a 13-point drop in China. What does that tell you? Europe is clearly in love, but Asia is not so much.
First of all, I have an issue with all these pollings. Who are we polling? The people who are being polled are a class of citizen. I mean, and it's very interesting that Western Europe has the same, almost comparable culture to the United States. Only the intellectuals, their Hollywoods, the professor of university, they are the ones who are making the call, how to answer, etc. But having said that, that's not true that all of the world has a favorable view of this administration. Those who want to pursue the same policies, Germany, France, obviously, like for the Iran deal, their companies are very happy that we are going back to the Iran deal. They're going to make money. But civil societies in Eastern Europe, Central Europe, the Arab world, in Africa, I'm not sure they are very excited, because our position now is that we can cut deals with authoritarians. That's not exactly what the people in tough areas are very excited about.
Yeah, no, what we're seeing is a return to the default. This is a return to the default of old, the way business was done back in the Obama days and long before. We'll see how that pans out, as you said, for the civil society on the ground. WALID PHARES, thank you as always for being here.
Thank you, Raymond.
Out! Out! Out of this property immediately until you come back with a warrant. Out of this property, you Nazis!
That confrontation took place this past Easter Sunday. My next guest has now been visited twice by police during services at his church in Canada. Law enforcement and Ministry of Health officials say that Street Church in Calgary, Alberta, is in violation of COVID-19 safety protocols. Do police in Canada have a right to disrupt services in progress? And do these confrontations represent a form of harassment and intimidation? Joining me now to share his experience is Pastor ARTUR Pawlowski of Street Church Ministries in Calgary, Alberta. Pastor, thank you for being here. Before we get to what happened at your church this past weekend, I want to go back to Easter Sunday. What COVID-19 protocols were you originally accused of violating at your church services?
Well, that's an interesting story, because I have not been accused of any of them. No one told me that I am in a breach of any regulations or laws. Those authorities simply wanted to come in with their guns, with their tasers, with their uniforms to observe church service, to harass and to intimidate parishioners, which is unacceptable under the Criminal Code of Canada. Of course, as you know, Section 176, 1, 2, and 3, you're not allowed to do such a thing. You're not allowed to interfere with the clergyman while he's conducting his duty, officiating the service. You're not allowed to come in and disrupt a religious gathering. That's 5 years jail time. And of course, trespassing. That's another one. So they came, I think they came to observe if I'm wearing a mask while I'm preaching the gospel in the congregation. They wanted to see if people are social distancing and if I'm, God forbid, giving a communion to my parishioners. So that's, I think, they wanted to come and see. I didn't wait for their explanation. What they did was wrong, was illegal, unconstitutional, and they did it in the middle of church gathering. If they want to observe anything, if they want to come and inspect the building, they're welcome to do so, but not in the middle of service. That's unacceptable. That's harassment.
Pastor, did they have a warrant of any kind?
No, they don't have a warrant to this day. They have a court order. And pretty much, or irony, they have found a judge. We all heard about Bill Gates. Well, I don't know if that's a family or not, but David Gates signed a court order, a judge, allowing them to come in. And the order says that they can bring anyone they want. So we had SWAT team and, the gang suppression team, the SWAT team coming with them as well, with a dozen other officers filming, taking pictures, recording everything. And they wanted to get into the place of sanctuary, into the place of worship. It's shocking, unbelievable. Even during the Middle Ages, when we call the Dark Ages, whatever, the knights were commanded by law to leave their swords outside of the cathedral, outside of the church, outside of the synagogue. They were not allowed to bring their weapons inside of the place of worship, place of sanctuary. But these days, 21st century, nothing is holy anymore. And they walked in like into a restaurant trying to enforce some regulations.
I want to move on to what happened this past weekend. The police and the Ministry of Health officer showed up at your church again. I want to show people a little bit of what happened.
This is for you. It basically outlines the fact we have the right to enter today. Just wanted to be able to come today and then at least explain the order, serve the order, and then we can stand at the back.
No, you can contact. No. You can contact my lawyer. I do not cooperate with the Gestapo. I do not talk to the Nazis. You came in your uniforms like thugs.
I just wanted to explain a little bit about the order.
I'm not interested.
I just wanted to at least have a conversation.
I'm not interested in talking. You see, this is what the Gestapo is doing. You're coming to the place of worship to intimidate and to harass. So you can make an appointment. Lady, listen to me. You can make an appointment.
Pastor, as you explained before, police, according to the law, are not permitted to disrupt an ongoing church service. And yet we have armed officers entering and observing what happens at your church. This seems like a disruption.
Of course, it is a disruption. I mean, look, I had to come out and talk to them instead of doing my job, my duty, preaching to parishioners that came and they wanted to be left alone. They wanted to come in peace into a place of sanctuary, a place of protection by the federal laws. I was not able to do it because I was disrupted. I was interfered while I was conducting my duty, and they wanted to do the same thing to the parishioners. And that's, of course, unacceptable. I mean, the level of lawlessness that we are experiencing in this country is absolutely shocking. And they didn't come just once. I've told them what I've told them. I was reading the court order. She presented me with the court order, and I started to read it, but she kept interrupting me. I could not even finish reading the order without her interrupting me over and over again. So finally I said, you know what, send this to the lawyer and get out. I want to go back and do what I came to do, which is officiating a church service. And you go. Eventually they left, but behold, they left only for about half an hour, because that's the same day they came back again while I was already halfway through my preaching sermon with the church, and they wanted to do the same thing.
Did they explain exactly how you and your congregation were allegedly in violation of these protocols?
No, to this day, they have not said anything to me. Actually, I offered a number of times. I offered to sit down with them. I offered to open the church building. I said, let's do it. You want to inspect the facility? I have no problem with that. You can come. I can come and you can talk to me, but not during the church service. That's unacceptable. Right. That's illegal.
Why do you think they're so focused on your congregation, and are other churches in Calgary experiencing the same kind of scrutiny?
Most of the churches in Canada are shut down, like 99%. There's few that are open underground. In the city of Calgary, they're meeting underground, just like in China. There is one more church that is open, and the authorities are doing to them exactly the same thing, walking in, taking pictures, intimidating pastor, parishioners, and tickets after tickets. I already got 28 COVID tickets so far. And the problem that we're seeing right now is the infringement of our rights. And let me add something to you, that this didn't happen just a few weeks ago. This is an ongoing harassment for the past 30 months. The mayor of the city of Calgary, Nahed Nenshi, is a Muslim mayor. He has been hunting me down for a number of years with tickets, with bylaws, with police, taking pictures, intimidating. They're using the armed forces of police and the bylaws to crack down on Christianity with the right to worship in the middle of their time of worship.
Is there any legal redress? I mean, are you suing the city? Are you suing the mayor?
Right now, we are in the middle of back and forth with the lawyer. We are sending letters. We already asked the other side to give us disclosures. We did not receive them. We contacted the court, the judge. We did not receive anything yet from the courts and from the judge and from the other side lawyer. So we are waiting. I was told that I can be arrested at any moment, anytime, right now, day or night, for my horrible crimes of opening the church for the parishioners, for the free people in a free and democratic society. So I don't know what is going to happen. I have intention to do a church service this Saturday again. And of course, we are on the streets 4 times a week. Again, we're not planning to close the feeding of the poor. We feed thousands of people that are under the bridges, in bushes, people that are neglected, dying. They need the necessities of life. And that's what we're providing, saving lives. We're the first responders. We are the essential services, just like the police, just like the doctors, paramedics, and nurses. However, the government thinks that we are not needed, not welcomed, and we need to be destroyed for the crime of feeding the poor. I disagree. And the same way with the church building, I disagree that they have a right to just walk in and disrupt everything, harassing people, intimidating people with their guns and tasers and handcuffs in their uniforms.
Pastor ARTUR Pawlowski, well, I thank you so much for being here. We will keep in touch with you and continue to monitor this story. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rise up, stand up, and do not allow them to steal what's rightfully yours, your right to worship your God in peace. Be blessed.
What was Jesus' Last Supper really like? And why would a filmmaker choose to create a living tableau of Leonardo da Vinci's most famous masterpiece? Joining me now to discuss this is award-winning director, screenwriter, producer, and creator of The Last Supper, the living tableau, Armondo Acosta. Thank you so much for being here. Armondo, why create a cinematic vision of a painting? And why this painting in particular?
The simple answer is that I was assigned to do it. I live in varying levels of consciousness in my life, and on a certain level of consciousness, I receive information, inspiration, you might say, like a muse. And I was literally told that I was going to make a film of Leonardo da Vinci and The Last Supper. And when I came out of my deep sleep state, and it's not a dream state that I was in, I suddenly realized that I had to do it. And so I was fascinated because Leonardo da Vinci has been a mentor of many mentors I've had in my life, which I'm grateful for, spiritual and intellectual, creatively, and I've learned from them. And so I said, I'm going to do it. And I thought, well, if I do that, I'm going to make it living, not something that's static and ancient and something that has frankly been decaying over time. So in the world of zeros and ones, I could make it original and one of a kind. And I just wanted to have everyone that could help me with this. And I got the best cinematographer alive, I believe, and best production designer and set dresser, and from Italy. And we did what we had to do. It was truly an assignment.
No, you really did assemble a dream team here. That's what you call them. Academy Award-winning cinematographer, the cinematographer of Apocalypse Now and The Last Emperor. I mean, you've had the set designers who've won Oscars. How did you come to collaborate on this? And what was it like to work with this team? How long did it take you?
I think both of them, all of them would tell you that I went to visit them, one at Cinecittà in Rome. And I knew Storaro before, and as a cinematographer myself, I consider him one of the true artists of that mastery. And so I wanted him, and it turned out, which is going to be unbelievable press, but his whole life's ambition as a creative 3-time Oscar winner, he doesn't need more accolades. What he wanted was to realize his dream, and that was to light the Last Supper the way he and what he believed to be Leonardo's way. And we did it.
Yeah.
And so Dante also, you know, Dante Ferretti, who's very dear to me, he's an artist, he's a painter, which is where I started. I think all of us in this game start off by doodling on a napkin. But they were really, really completely, I can truly say that this was a work of devotion and love. I had 3 lovers on the set, and I've been called the same. I must tell you. And the subject is beautiful. And when it came alive for me, it was a thrill. I was in tears when we had our last take. And I said, that's it. We've done it.
Talk to me for a moment about the cast for this project. They came from your crew and students from your school, the Academy of Film and the Arts. These are carpenters, painters, costumers. None are trained actors. Why did you choose to go with non-actors for the project?
I didn't choose. I swear to you, no one's going to believe this, except we have documented every bit of this with, you know, B-roll and cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
And the best way I can describe this briefly is that it was with Dante Ferretti and Vittorio. They suddenly realized, without being involved in the casting, that the Jesus was the one that was on a ladder with a paint roller, and the other apostles were all doing what they do on my sets in the studio. They're my students. Some of them have been with me for 15 years. And I suddenly realized before this happened that I saw them, because I know every square inch of that masterpiece of Leonardo's. That's number one. I was devoted to it. I know every square inch of it. And I suddenly thought, oh, that's Fabio. Oh, look, that's, And I suddenly realized this is real. This is not publicity. And the proof of it is they all literally dropped their hammers and saws and things, and I dressed them. I had a makeup people. I had a hair person. I'm a filmmaker. And they were identical. But a little side story quickly is that I was traveling, and I suddenly was in a hotel room, and I saw myself in the mirror, in the bathroom. And I thought, oh, I look like Taddeo. And nobody knows who Taddeo is. He's the far guy on the right with white hair.
St. Jude, yeah.
And I said, oh my God, I look like Taddeo. So I said, I'm going to do what Hitchcock did, which I worked on the birds with him, by the way. And I did the birds with him. And he was an amazing man, but that's for another time. But I thought, I'm going to do it. So I jumped on the set. So the Taddeo on the far right with the white hair, that's this guy here. It's absolutely true. It's documented. You're going to read about it, and our PR people are going to let everybody know that it's not a fake thing. It's real. And
this is like Christ calling out to the apostles. They dropped the nets, they dropped their pens, they dropped their practices, and joined him suddenly. So that's what I thought when I read this. Now, the plaster cast costumes you created for these actors, and I think you did so they could maintain their positions over several hours of shooting. So each fold and wrinkle was identical to the painting. What was that like? I mean, it had to be challenging for these men to move naturally while in these costumes.
Yeah, and first of all, I have to tell you that I have a motorbike and I run around my studio. I have a film studio with my film school in Belgium, and I was buzzing around and I thought, how am I going to do this? Because I'm Virgo Libra, so I like things, like my wife used to say, kind of close to perfect, and drove her crazy. But I thought, oh my God, I'll make molds of these people in the exact position, and that way I can dress the mold, and every wrinkle, and if you look very carefully, you will see that every wrinkle is identical. The decoration around the neck, everything. And for me, you might imagine, I saw them getting into these things. We had to make molds of them before, so they were very comfortable and they could move. Nobody is going to ever know, except by the way we're telling them, that how did we keep them in that order? Because there was one moment and one frame that says it's identical. And so that moment I froze, and it's on there for 15, 20 seconds, and it's identical. And I live with these.
The movie, you shot this in slow motion, Armando, and there was a lot of attention to the way it was lit. How did you decide to shoot this, and why in slow motion? And what were the challenges to the lighting? This had to take an eternity.
I have to tell you, the basic central truth is that I was born with a gift. I actually see in slow motion. I made in 1961 with Bill Shatner from Star Trek the slowest film that had ever been filmed. I used a NASA camera, so I was obsessed with slow motion. I'm doing work right now, so slow-mo is my craft. I see the in-betweens. I can see what's happening, and I thought, this is the way you would be able to look at it as a painting that moves, but it moves so slowly that you can continue to see it as a painting, a work of art. If it moves, you're watching a movie. If you see people, actors or whoever, but if it's moving so slowly, you get a chance to really look at the devotion, the performance, the color, the light, and you see what I was attempting to do is to create another work of art. I'm copying a masterpiece, the most important masterpiece in the history of art. So how am I going to do anything less? But I also wanted the audience to be able to see that in slow-mo, you get to see that it's all just so beautiful. That's why I wanted the lighting by Vittorio to be so right. And Dante, it's in Francesca, everything, the orange on the table, which I still look at every time I see it. That orange is exactly where it was, the same size, everything. So the audience, I've given the opportunity for at least for 15 to 20 seconds to see the identical copy, but with living beings. And also he enters and he
that's different from the painting. They're waiting for Jesus to enter, and then he enters the frame, and then we see the shot that, really has made history and continues in our minds and hearts, all these centuries later. You shot this tableau with the intention of releasing it around the world in 2020. That was stalled by the pandemic. This Easter, it was projected without a live audience, obviously, and captured virtually in Jerusalem, in Milan. There is, I know, a plan to do the actual living tableau. Where are you going to do it? A church in Rome?
It's a secret.
Oh, a secret.
It's a secret, yes, because it's going to be amazing. It's just going to be amazing. I don't know whether you know, but we've been invited to present it in 2021 in Dubai. That's still a little bit of a secret, but the presentation of it is a secret. I'm going to give you a piece of the secret, okay? Is that all the people that were on the screen are going to be live.
Wow. No, it's an amazing thing. It's a little surreal watching it, I have to tell you. What do you hope viewers take away, Armando? And before I leave you, what did you learn from Hitchcock? Now I bet you have another secret or two to share.
What did I learn from Hitchcock? aside from a few dirty jokes, but no, he was a master. He was a master of his craft, and I had the good fortune of studying with many of them. Excuse me, but he had an idea, and it's like Fellini, the same. You have an idea, you have a vision that can very quickly become an obsession. And if you have that vision and you have an idea and you want to share it, it becomes obsessive. And he was obsessive. He was an obsessive character. That's why you can see a whole series of Hitchcock movies, and they're Hitchcock movies. And if you see Fellini, it's Fellini, you know? So that very simple human quality turns into passion. It comes from passion, and you become obsessed with it. And that's what I learned. I learned from him how to be obsessed with a piece of action that he dwelled on. I mean, if you look at Psycho, you can see, I mean, it's just full of imagery that is so, it's violent and scary maybe, but it was passionate. So I learned passion, and so he was a great devoted and passionate man.
Yeah. Before I let you go, the Living Tableau has been released as a standalone piece. However, this is also the opening sequence of a feature film project you're working on, The Last Supper, A Divine Prophecy. What is that?
Well, I remind you of my first answer to your question was that it was to make The Last Supper, not to make a tableau. The tableau is actually the first 10 minutes of my feature film, which I'm halfway through, and I can tell you that it is epic in size, even with this pandemic. It's epic. It's going to be glittered with some important people, and I'm just halfway through now, and I will go back to my studios and finish it, because it's a feature film, and this was only designed to be the opening. But suddenly, it started to have some attraction, and it's been in the museum here and there, and people are attracted to it. I'm grateful, but it's just the beginning of my film, and that's an enormous work. I'm 82 years old, and I please God that I have the energy and the passion doesn't let me loose, that I will be able to finish it. And what you're seeing now, and you will see in the museums around the world, which we're talking to now, is exactly what the opening of the film. And that gives you exactly the satisfaction of what is this all about? And it's about that masterpiece. It's about that, the Eucharist. That's the most important point. That I was baptized Catholic, but that's not the reason. The Eucharist is the central theme, and is the central theme of my passion, of my work. When he lists the bread and he offers the wine, that's the essence of it. Absolutely the essence of it. And you don't have to be Catholic to understand the essence of bread and wine and life.
I hope when you finish the film, you'll come back and share its entirety with us. This little glimpse, though, is really tantalizing, and I think people will be gratified by it. Armondo Acosta's The Living Tableau. You can see it at thelivingtableau.com. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Raymond.
Born 457 years ago this week, William Shakespeare's exact date of birth is unknown, but it's commemorated on April 23rd, 1564. In classic dramatic fashion, it would be the same date that he would die 52 years later in 1616. Now, Shakespeare is obviously regarded as the greatest playwright and writer of all time. My next guest is a noted Shakespeare scholar who's explored the religious and political messages encoded in the bard's work. In Shakespeare and the Resistance, the Earl of Southampton, the Essex Rebellion, and the poems that challenged Tudor tyranny, she is focused on two obscure Shakespeare poems which the bard may have used to address the religious and political upheaval in England at the time. Here's my interview with the author of Shakespeare and the Resistance, Clare Asquith. What I loved about reading this, it debunked the myth of Elizabeth's reign, which we have a long tail on. And the narrative is she was this wonderful queen. She was a tolerant queen. That doesn't seem to be the case.
Less and less so as her reign continued. And the tyranny, which is what people began to call it at the end, was operated not by the Queen directly, but by her very, very expert Privy Council and advisors, and particularly William Cecil Lord Burleigh, who, the more you read Shakespeare and his contemporaries, Spencer, the more you realize they saw him as the demon. So yes, he operated under the glamorous guise of Elizabeth, a tighter and tighter police state, and I think that's what scholars recognize now.
A police state. Yeah. No. Well, you see the Tower of London, and I mean,
yes,
it was a pretty cruel place, and you can't get past the scrawlings. I've seen them myself on the wall, the etchings on the wall, Jesuit insignia, prayers, crosses, all sorts of Catholic, very Catholic references, which tell us something further. How does the Catholic dimension fit in to not only the story of Elizabethan England, but more particularly into the life and background of William Shakespeare?
Henry VIII is where it began, and you can see Shakespeare taking that deep breath with his second narrative poem. He tries to go back, how did we get into this situation? How did it all start? And it started, of course, when Henry VIII took over the Church of England in England and said he, the king, was head of the church. And in order to do that, he had to construct a synthetic religion, not Lutheran, because Luther laughed at the idea of a monarch being head of the church, and not Catholic, because of course the Pope would not accept a monarch being head of the church. So this was thought of at the time as a third religion. And as time went on, with its daughter particularly, in order to establish loyalty to this new church, an oath was established, the oath of supremacy, whereby everybody who wanted any sort of public job of any kind had to swear allegiance to the monarch as head of the church. Now, Catholics couldn't do that in good conscience. Reformers couldn't do that in good conscience. So you begin to have a perjured country. Everybody secretly practicing or believing something which openly they didn't say.
Right.
Now, Catholics were a much bigger number than historians up to now have recognized. When Queen Elizabeth's successor came to the throne, he, James I, had to say, I am going to give toleration to Catholics. And that shows what a huge, important, silent, dangerous, possibly majority they were. As for Shakespeare's family, like if you look at any family at that time, they were enmeshed deeply in this conflict. His father had up for recusancy, that is, not attending the state church.
Right.
Nobody really knows why. Could have been for debt.
But he was penalized.
He was penalized. He had to pay. And that's £20 a month you had to pay for not attending the state church, which was the equivalent of a year's salary for a grammar school teacher.
Wow.
So you just couldn't do it. You had to be a hero. I mean, there were, particularly Catholics, as we know, who were heroes at this time. But most people, Raymond, I don't know about you, but certainly me, we would have caved in and paid lip service to this increasingly tight regime. But Shakespeare had a tragic case in his own family, and a typical one. John Somerville, his cousin, lost it completely. He was restricted as a young man, and he galloped to London with a gun saying, I'm going to kill the Queen. And the result of that was not only he died in the Tower, but the head of Shakespeare's mother's family, Edward Arden, yes, he was executed.
While you mentioned Shakespeare's family and his upbringing, I want to show people, several years ago, you and I went to Stratford-on-Avon, and we talked about the training of this boy from this little hamlet far from London, and how that training, though it seems parochial, really set the stage for the entire world to look in, not only on this history of England at the time, but into the hearts of humanity. Take a look at this.
They were called grammar schools not for nothing. They really did learn grammar, rhetoric, how to use language. Later on, he clearly had the run of a great man's library, and a lot more of his later education could have come from that. He could have gone to university, I think. But what's very interesting about Stratford Grammar School is that the teachers were chosen and paid for by the guild which Shakespeare's father eventually became chief of, became bailiff. The 6 teachers who were there covering Shakespeare's period, out of those 6, 4 had clear Catholic sympathies at a time when the government was cracking down on this. One of Shakespeare's teachers, Simon Hunt, taught Shakespeare when he was 9. 2 years later, he went off to Dowie and he became a Jesuit priest. And so it shows one thing that people have realized, that Shakespeare was educated in the humanist way, that is to see allegory and depth and many layers of meaning in texts. What the government and what the Puritans wanted was literal reading.
And what I love about this new book is it really is not only the history of this period, but it tells us something that we're still living through all over the world. But the focus here are 2 neglected poems, Adonis and Venus, or Venus and Adonis, and The Rape of Lucretia. And I have to say, as an actor and as a reader, I avoided these like the plague because I couldn't make heads or tails of them. What did we miss? Why are they so unreadable and largely neglected?
Well, because they're so boring. It's an extraordinary feat on Shakespeare's part, because they're both about a violent sexual assault on one on a boy by a woman much stronger than him, and one on a woman. And yet, somehow, although, you know, we start both of them with a tremendous beginning that makes you, both opening verses are fantastic, and then digression after digression. And it's rather like those neoclassical Renaissance tapestries where there's all sorts of decoration all around the tapestry, but the main subject has got lost. Yes.
Totally lost.
Yes.
And in this case, your contention is it's because he's writing about something other. He's using the allegory to tell a different tale and embed it in a hidden way.
Yeah, exactly. And curiously, at the time he was writing these, a lot of his contemporaries were doing the same thing, and the same theme is there at the heart of all these narrative poems. And they have the same subject. It's an assault by a monarch on a subject. So they're all about the abuse of power. So Shakespeare, both these poems are about a king. Actually, in the story, it's not a king, but Shakespeare changed it so he is a king abusing a woman, and a queen. Actually, in the story, she's not a queen, she's a goddess, but Shakespeare changes it to a queen. So it shows that Shakespeare's genius, and he does it better than anyone else, is to take his source, strip it down, and rebuild it with material that relates not to the neoclassical or the mythical source, but to his own time.
And a happy birthday to William Shakespeare. He gives me such joy, and so many of us. Shakespeare and the Resistance by Clare Asquith is still available at bookstores everywhere and online. That is all the time we have for now. Be sure to join us next week. Father Jerry Murray will be here. We're going to talk about whether the president should be denied communion, as some are suggesting. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.